The harsh Wyoming wind howled across the prairie that night, but it wasn't the wind that caught Hank Mitchell's attention. It was his prized Mustang, Thunder, pacing frantically in circles before the old barn. The horse's nervous whinnying carried an unmistakable note of distress, his hooves pawing at the dry earth as if trying to uncover some buried secret. In his 30 years of running the Mitchell Ranch, Hank had never seen Thunder behave quite like this. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Let us know which city you're watching us from. Stay with us. The seasoned rancher pulled his weathered jacket tighter around his broad shoulders, trying to ward off the autumn chill. Something didn't feel right. Thunder was more than just a horse. He was practically family, with an uncanny ability to sense when things were amiss. The last time the Mustang had acted this way was 5 years ago, on the night that changed everything. The night Sarah disappeared. Hank pushed the painful memory aside and reached for the flashlight hanging by the back door. The beam cut through the darkness as he made his way across the yard, his boots crunching on the gravel. Thunder's agitation seemed to increase with each step Hank took toward the barn, the horse's dark eyes reflecting an almost human-like urgency. The heavy wooden door creaked open under Hank's calloused hand, the sound echoing through the still night air. The familiar scent of hay and damp earth filled his nostrils, but something else caught his attention immediately. Small, muddy footprints leading into the depths of the barn, too small to belong to an adult. His heart began to race. The flashlight beam trembling slightly as he followed the trail. The footprints wound between hay bales and old farming equipment leading toward the back of the structure. A muffled sound broke the silence, and Hank's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the rustle of barn mice or the cooing of nesting pigeons. This was different. Moving cautiously forward, each step causing the old floorboards to protest beneath his weight, Hank directed the beam toward the source of the sound. There, huddled between two large hay bales, was a small figure, a child. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, her bare feet caked with mud, her clothes dusty and torn. She was shivering, whether from fear or cold, Hank couldn't tell. Outside, Thunder had grown quiet, his frantic pacing replaced by a gentle approach toward the barn entrance. It was as if the horse knew something Hank didn't, some piece of this puzzling situation that was yet to reveal itself. The flashlight beam illuminated the girl's face, and Hank felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Around her neck hung a small, silver pendant in the shape of a star, identical to the one Sarah had worn. He remembered placing it around her neck on her 5th birthday, watching her eyes light up as she promised never to take it off. And she never had, not until that terrible night when she vanished without a trace. Before Hank could process what he was seeing, the girl's eyes widened with fear, and she pointed urgently toward the barn entrance. That's when he heard it, the sound of tires on gravel approaching his property. Thunder's ears pricked forward, his muscular body tensing as headlights swept across the barnyard. In that moment, Hank's protective instincts took over. He clicked off the flashlight and moved swiftly to the child's side, helping her to her feet. Her small hand clutched his, ice-cold and trembling, as he guided her carefully toward the house. Thunder positioned himself between the barn and the approaching vehicle, his powerful presence a silent guardian in the darkness. Inside the Eistige house, Hank drew the curtains and watched through a small gap as an old sedan pulled up near his fence line. The headlights remained on, illuminating swirling dust particles in their beams, but no one emerged from the vehicle. The girl pressed closer to his side, her heart racing so fast he could feel it through her thin shirt. Thunder's sharp whinny cut through the tension, the horse moving with deliberate showmanship, drawing attention to himself. Hank used the distraction to reach for his phone, dialing the sheriff's office with fingers that barely trembled. As he waited for an answer, the headlights suddenly extinguished and the car's engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed as the vehicle reversed and sped away into the darkness, leaving only questions in its wake. Looking down at the girl beside him, Hank noticed details he'd missed in the barn. The familiar curve of her nose, the set of her jaw. Features that made his heart ache with recognition, but it couldn't be possible, could it? 5 years had passed since Sarah disappeared, yet here was a child wearing her necklace with eyes that seemed to hold secrets too heavy for her young shoulders. Thunder's watchful presence remained at the barn entrance, his silhouette a steadfast sentinel against the Wyoming night. As Hank waited for help to arrive, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night would mark the beginning of something extraordinary. A mystery that had been 5 years in the making, finally ready to unfold. The first rays of dawn painted the Wyoming sky in soft pinks and golds as Sheriff Laura Bennett's patrol car pulled up to the Mitchell Ranch. Thunder, still standing guard near the barn, barely shifted his gaze from the road. The magnificent Mustang's usual restlessness had been replaced by an almost supernatural vigilance, as if he understood the gravity of the situation unfolding around him. Inside the house, Hank sat at his worn kitchen table, watching the girl devour a bowl of warm oatmeal. He'd wrapped her in one of Sarah's old blankets, the fabric worn soft from years of use. The silver star pendant caught the morning light, sending tiny reflections dancing across the walls. Every time the child moved, Hank's heart clenched with a mixture of hope and fear. Sheriff Bennett's boots echoed on the porch steps, followed by a firm knock. The girl startled, dropping her spoon with a clatter, but Thunder's reassuring wicker from outside seemed to calm her. Hank opened the door to find Laura's familiar face, lined with concern and curiosity. They'd known each other for years, and she'd been there through the darkest days after Sarah's disappearance. "Hank," Laura nodded, stepping inside. Her experienced eyes took in the scene. The girl at the table, the muddy footprints on the floor, the silver pendant. Her hand unconsciously moved to the notebook in her pocket, but she didn't take it out. Not yet. "Tell me everything." As Hank recounted the events of the night, the girl remained silent, her eyes darting between the adults. Laura noticed how she seemed to relax whenever Thunder's occasional neighs drifted through the window, as if the horse's presence provided some sort of comfort or protection. "Has she said anything?" Laura asked, keeping her voice gentle. Hank shook his head. "Not a word, but Laura—" He hesitated, his voice thick with emotion. "That necklace, it's Sarah's. I'd know it anywhere. I had it custom made for her 10th birthday. The jeweler in town, old Mr. Peterson, he added those tiny diamonds around the edge. They catch the light just like that." Laura's breath caught. She remembered that necklace too, had helped search for any trace of it after Sarah disappeared. "We need to take this slow, Hank," she cautioned, though her own heart was racing with possibilities. "Let me make some calls. We need to do this by the book." The girl suddenly stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, pressing her small hand against the glass. Thunder immediately responded, trotting closer to the house. The connection between them was undeniable, almost mystical. "There's something else," Hank said, lowering his voice. "That car last night. It was a dark sedan, older model. Couldn't make out the plates in the dark, but..." He paused, remembering something. There was a dent in the front fender, driver's side. Laura's expression shifted. A week ago, they'd received reports of a suspicious vehicle matching that description near the elementary school in town. She'd dismissed it as paranoid parents, but now Thunder's urgent whinny drew their attention. The Mustang was staring intently down the road, his powerful body tense. Laura moved to the window, her hand instinctively moving to her hip. In the distance, a cloud of dust marked the approach of another vehicle. The girl grabbed Hank's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. For the first time since he'd found her, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "They're coming back." The words sent a chill down Hank's spine. Thunder's agitation increased, the horse moving deliberately between the approaching vehicle and the house. Laura strode to her patrol car, radioing for backup, while Hank drew the girl away from the window. The approaching vehicle was different from the one last night, a newer model pickup truck, forest green. It slowed as it passed the ranch entrance, and through the dust, Hank caught a glimpse of the driver. His blood ran cold. He knew that face, had seen it before, 5 years ago. The man had been asking questions around town about buying horses, had even come to look at Thunder. Just days before Sarah disappeared, the truck continued past the ranch, but Hank wasn't fooled. Whoever these people were, they weren't done. They knew where the girl was now, and they would be back. But this time, things would be different. This time, he had help. This time, he wouldn't let them take her away. Thunder's protective stance never wavered, his dark eyes following the truck until it disappeared around the bend. The Mustang seemed to understand something fundamental about the situation, about the girl, about the danger, about everything. And as the morning sun climbed higher in the Wyoming sky, Hank realized that the mystery of his daughter's disappearance might finally be unraveling, thanks to a frightened child and a remarkable horse who seemed destined to bring the truth to light. Sheriff Laura Bennett had seen her share of strange cases in Wyoming, but something about this one touched a deeper chord. As she watched Hank pace the kitchen floor, her mind wandered back to that terrible morning 5 years ago when he'd called about Sarah. The search parties, the sleepless nights, the gradual fade of hope in his eyes. It all came rushing back. The girl, who still hadn't revealed her name, sat curled in Sarah's old reading chair, clutching the silver star pendant. Thunder remained visible through the window, his vigilant presence a constant comfort. Every few minutes, the Mustang would turn his head toward the house, as if checking on his young charge. "Hank," Laura said, breaking the tense silence. "That man you recognized, tell me more about him." Hank's weathered face darkened with memory. Called himself James Wheeler. Came around spring of 19, said he was looking to buy horses for some fancy ranch in Montana. Spent a lot of time asking about Thunder, offering way more than he was worth. He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. "Thunder never liked him. Should have listened to my horse's instincts back then." The girl stirred at Wheeler's name, her small fingers tightening around the pendant. Laura noticed the reaction immediately, but before she could ask anything, Thunder's warning whinny split the air. The Mustang's hooves thundered against the ground, drawing their attention to the window. A cloud of dust approached from the direction of town, but this time it was Laura's backup. 2 patrol cars and an unmarked vehicle she recognized as belonging to Agent Marcus Cooper from the regional FBI office. The girl pressed herself deeper into the chair, but Thunder's reassuring neigh seemed to calm her fears. Agent Cooper was a tall man with kind eyes that belied his sharp intelligence. He'd worked Sarah's case 5 years ago, and the sight of him stepping out of his car brought a fresh wave of memories. But this time, his presence felt different, like pieces of a long-dormant puzzle were finally falling into place. "Sheriff Bennett," Cooper nodded as he entered, then turned to Hank. "Mr. Mitchell." His gaze settled on the girl, noting the pendant, the way she seemed to draw strength from Thunder's presence outside. "I think it's time we had a serious conversation about James Wheeler." Laura watched as Cooper pulled out a tablet, bringing up a series of photos. "Wheeler's been on our radar for years, operating under different names across several states. We've never been able to pin anything on him, but wherever he shows up, strange things happen, and it always involves horses." The girl suddenly stood, walking to the window. Thunder responded immediately, moving closer. The connection between them was almost palpable, like an invisible thread binding horse and child. Cooper observed this with intense interest. "There's something you need to see," he said, pulling up another image. It showed a younger Wheeler at a ranch in Montana, and in the background, barely visible, was a familiar silver pendant around a child's neck. The photo was dated just months after Sarah's disappearance. Hank's sharp intake of breath filled the room. The girl turned from the window, her eyes finding the tablet screen. For the first time, she spoke more than a whisper, her voice small but clear. The Star Ranch. Those 3 words sent a ripple through the room. Cooper's expression sharpened. "What do you know about the Star Ranch?" But before she could answer, Thunder's urgent whinny cut through the air again. This time it was different. Not a warning, but a call of recognition. Through the window, they could see another horse approaching along the fence line, its rider slumped forward, clinging to the saddle. The girl pressed her hands against the glass, her eyes wide. "Emma," she breathed, and there was both joy and fear in her voice. Hank was already moving toward the door, but Laura caught his arm. "Wait," she cautioned, drawing her weapon. Cooper signaled to his agents outside, who moved into position with practiced efficiency. Thunder, however, showed no signs of alarm. The Mustang approached the newcomer with almost gentle care, nickering softly. The rider, who couldn't have been more than 16, raised her head weakly. Around her neck glinted another silver star pendant, identical to the one the younger girl wore. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture that was both horrifying and hopeful. Wheeler hadn't just taken Sarah, he'd taken other children too. And somehow, these horses, especially Thunder, were connected to it all. As they watched the scene unfold, the young girl finally spoke again, her voice stronger now. "The horses always know. They're the ones who help us find our way home." She touched her pendant, a gesture mirrored by the girl on horseback outside. "They're the ones who save us." Thunder stood between the house and the approaching agents, his posture making it clear that no one would reach either girl without his approval. And in that moment, as the Wyoming sun cast long shadows across the ranch, it became apparent that this magnificent Mustang was more than just a horse. He was a guardian, a protector, and perhaps the key to unraveling a mystery that had haunted these lands for far too long. The late morning sun cast long shadows across the Mitchell ranch as Emma was carefully helped into the house. Thunder and the horse she'd arrived on, a dappled mare with intelligent eyes, stood watch by the porch, their ears constantly moving, alert to every sound. The connection between the horses and the girls was undeniable, almost mystical in its intensity. Emma, the older girl, sat wrapped in a blanket on the couch, her hands trembling slightly around a mug of hot tea. Her silver star pendant caught the light, identical to the one worn by the younger girl, who hadn't left her side since she'd arrived. Agent Cooper noticed how they communicated without words, sharing glances that spoke volumes. "The Star Ranch," Emma finally spoke, her voice stronger than expected. "That's what he calls it. Wheeler, I mean. Says it's a place for special children and special horses." She looked out the window at Thunder and the mare. "He doesn't understand, though. The horses, they're not what he thinks they are. They're protectors." Hank leaned forward, his heart racing. "Sarah," he said softly, "my daughter. Was she—" Emma's eyes filled with tears. "She was there. She told us about Thunder, about how he could sense things. That's how we knew we could trust the horses to help us." She touched her pendant. "These aren't just necklaces, they're symbols. Wheeler gives one to each girl he—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The younger girl, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "The horses know who needs help. They always know." She looked at Thunder with unwavering trust. "That's why he was so upset last night. He knew I was coming." Sheriff Bennett exchanged glances with Agent Cooper. This was bigger than they'd imagined. Wheeler hadn't just taken Sarah. He'd been operating for years, hiding behind the facade of a legitimate ranching operation. And somehow the horses were the key to it all. "Tell us about the other girls," Cooper prompted gently. How many? 12, Emma interrupted. There were 12 of us. But now, she looked at the younger girl. Lucy and I were the last. Uns, the others, they got away too. The horses helped them just like thunder helped Lucy find her way here. Hank's mind was reeling. 12 girls, each with a silver star, each connected to a horse that somehow knew how to guide them to safety. It seemed impossible, yet here was the proof. 2 of them, safe in his living room, wearing the same pendant his Sarah had worn. Thunder's sudden whinny drew their attention. The Mustang was staring intently down the road, but his posture wasn't aggressive. If anything, he seemed expectant. The dappled mare joined him, both horses focused on something in the distance. "They're coming," Lucy whispered, a smile breaking across her face for the first time. "The others, the horses are calling them home." Through the dust and heat waves of the Wyoming morning, they could make out shapes approaching along the road. Horses, at least 5 of them, each carrying a rider. And around each rider's neck, visible even at a distance, glinted a silver star. Sheriff Bennett immediately radioed for medical support, while Cooper coordinated with his agents to secure the perimeter. But Thunder and the other horses showed no signs of alarm. They knew these riders, these girls, just as they'd known Lucy and Emma. Hank stood at the window, watching the approaching riders with tears in his eyes. Each horse moved with purpose, carrying its precious cargo with gentle care. These weren't just random animals. They were guardians, chosen somehow to protect these children and guide them to safety. "Sarah," Emma said softly, touching Hank's arm. "She's the one who figured it out first, how the horses could help us. Wheeler thought he was so clever, using the stars to mark us as his, but he never understood what they really meant." She touched her pendant again. "They're not his stars. They're like the stars that guide you home. And the horses, they're like angels. They know the way." Thunder's proud stance at the head of the driveway seemed to confirm her words. He was more than just a horse, more than just a faithful companion. He was a beacon of hope, a guardian spirit who had never given up on bringing these lost children home. As the riders drew closer, Lucy moved to the porch, her small hand resting on Thunder's strong neck. The Mustang lowered his head to her touch, his dark eyes reflecting a wisdom that transcended human understanding. In that moment, it was clear that this extraordinary horse had been more than just a witness to these events. He had been orchestrating them all along, patiently waiting for the right moment to bring all the stars back together. The Mitchell Ranch had never seen anything quite like this. 5 more girls, each riding bareback on horses that moved with extraordinary purpose, made their way up the dusty driveway. Thunder stood at attention, the unofficial leader of this remarkable equine rescue team. The dappled mare beside him nickered softly as if welcoming her companions home. Hank watched from the porch, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. Among the approaching riders, one figure caught his attention, a girl slightly taller than the others, her long, dark hair streaming behind her as she rode. Even at this distance, he recognized the way she sat in the saddle, the subtle shift of her weight that reminded him so much of Sarah. Sheriff Bennett and Agent Cooper had their teams maintaining a respectful distance, understanding that this moment needed to unfold naturally. The horses wouldn't allow anything else. These magnificent creatures had orchestrated something extraordinary, and they would see it through on their own terms. As the riders drew closer, Lucy and Emma moved to stand beside Thunder. The silver stars around their necks seemed to shimmer with an inner light matching the stars worn by the approaching girls. It was as if some cosmic force had aligned to bring them all together at this precise moment. The first horse to reach them was a powerful bay, carrying a girl who couldn't have been more than 13. Her eyes were fierce and protective as she looked over the others, but they softened when she saw Lucy and Emma. "You made it," she said, her voice catching. "We weren't sure if—" "Thunder helped," Lucy replied simply, patting the Mustang's strong neck. just like Sarah said he would. The name sent a ripple through the group. The tall girl on the black horse near the back straightened, and Hank felt his world tilt. He knew those eyes, that determined set of the jaw. Features he'd seen every day in his dreams for the past 5 years. "Dad?" The word floated across the yard, carrying 5 years of loss and hope within its single syllable. Thunder moved forward, creating a path between father and daughter. The black horse Sarah rode needed no guidance, walking steadily forward until they reached the porch steps. Tears streamed freely down Hank's face as he helped his daughter dismount, pulling her into an embrace that seemed to make time stand still. "I knew Thunder would understand," Sarah whispered against his shoulder. "He always knew when something was wrong, always tried to warn us. That's why Wheeler could never break him. He was too smart, too connected to something bigger than any of us understood." The other girls dismounted, forming a circle with their horses. Each animal stood protectively near its rider, creating a living barrier of trust and safety. Emma stepped forward, still wrapped in her blanket, and began to explain. "Wheeler thought he was so clever, using the stars to mark us as his," she said, her voice stronger now. But Sarah figured out that the horses could sense the connection. Between the pendants, they could always find each other, always knew which way to guide us. Wheeler never understood that he'd given us the very thing that would help us escape. Agent Cooper listened intently, his tablet recording every word. But it was Sheriff Bennett who asked the question they were all thinking. "But why? Why did Wheeler take you all?" Sarah's hand found her father's, squeezing it tight. "He was obsessed with creating the perfect ranch, perfect horses, perfect riders. He thought if he could train us from a young age, make us depend on him." She shook her head. "But he didn't count on the horses. They're special, not in the way he thought, but in a way he could never understand." Thunder moved to stand behind Sarah, his presence both protective and proud. The Mustang had been more than just a horse. He had been the catalyst for their salvation, the guardian who had never stopped believing, never stopped watching, never stopped waiting for the right moment to bring them all home. Lucy approached Sarah, her small hand reaching up to touch the silver star that matched her own. "You were right," she said softly, "about everything. The stars aren't his mark. They're like the stars in the sky. They help show us the way home." As the Wyoming sun climbed higher, casting its golden light over this extraordinary gathering, the truth of Lucy's words seemed to resonate across the ranch. These horses, led by the indomitable Spirit of Thunder, had done more than just rescue a group of lost girls. They had proven that some bonds transcend human understanding, that some connections are deeper than words can express. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Mitchell. Rancher Sheriff Bennett and Agent Cooper gathered statements from the girls. Inside the house, the silver star pendants caught the light, creating a constellation of hope and survival. Thunder and the other horses remained close, their presence a constant reminder of the extraordinary bond that had brought them all together. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her father's hand never far from her shoulder, as if he feared she might disappear again if he lost contact. "Wheeler's whole operation was built on appearances," she explained, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "To the outside world, the Star Ranch was a prestigious riding academy for gifted young riders. He had a way of finding girls who showed promise with horses, watching competitions, visiting small-town rodeos. That's how he found me," Emma added, wrapping her hands around a fresh cup of tea. "I was competing in a junior barrel racing event in Montana. He talked to my foster parents about a scholarship program, said I had natural talent." Her voice caught. The star pendant was supposed to be a symbol of acceptance into his elite program. Lucy, who hadn't strayed far from Thunder's view through the window, spoke up. "But the horses knew something was wrong. They always knew. Especially the ones like Thunder, the ones who couldn't be broken. Agent Cooper leaned forward, his tablet recording every word. "What do you mean, couldn't be broken?" Sarah's eyes met Thunder's through the window, a silent understanding passing between them. Wheeler had this theory about special horses, ones with what he called the old spirit. He believed they had some kind of sixth sense, an ability to connect with riders on a deeper level. Thunder was his prize example, but she smiled slightly. Thunder was too smart to play along. Outside, the Mustang's ears pricked forward at the sound of his name. The other horses moved closer to him, as if acknowledging his leadership. Each one had played a part in this remarkable escape, guided by some instinct that transcended human understanding. "It started small," Sarah continued. "Messages passed between us during riding lessons. The horses would act up at specific times, creating distractions that let us communicate. Wheeler thought he was training them, but they were really training us, showing us paths through the property, timing patterns of the guards." Hank's grip on his daughter's shoulder tightened slightly. "But why didn't you try to escape sooner?" "We did," one of the other girls, Rachel, spoke up from her position by the fireplace. "Or at least some tried. But Wheeler had a system. If anyone attempted to escape, others would face consequences. We couldn't risk it, not until we were sure we could all get out together." "That's where Thunder came in," Emma explained, her eyes shining with admiration for the Mustang. "He figured out the pattern of the star pendants first. Somehow, he could sense them, like they were giving off some kind of signal. He started acting differently around girls wearing them, more protective." Lucy nodded eagerly. "The other horses followed his lead. They'd get agitated when we were separated, almost like they were tracking us. Wheeler thought it was just herd behavior, but it was more than that." Sheriff Bennett exchanged glances with Agent Cooper. The story seemed impossible, yet the evidence was right in front of them. 7 girls, 7 horses, and an unshakable bond that had orchestrated one of the most remarkable escapes they'd ever encountered. "We had to wait for the right moment," Sarah explained, her voice taking on an edge of triumph. "Wheeler got careless. He started bringing in more girls, spreading his attention too thin. The horses sensed it, especially Thunder. They became more assertive, more coordinated in their actions." Through the window, Thunder's proud stance seemed to confirm her words. The Mustang had been more than just a means of escape. He had been the mastermind, the guardian spirit who had never given up on bringing these girls home. "But there's something else," Lucy said suddenly, her small hand clutching her star pendant. "Something Wheeler never knew about the stars." She looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "They're not just necklaces. When we're wearing them, the horses can find us anywhere. It's like they're real stars helping to guide us home." As if in response to her words, Thunder let out a soft whinny that was echoed by the other horses. The sound carried across the ranch, a harmony of hope and protection that seemed to make the very air vibrate with possibility. These magnificent creatures had done more than just help 7 girls escape. They had proven that some bonds go beyond human comprehension, that some connections are written in the stars themselves. The late afternoon brought dark clouds rolling across the Wyoming sky, matching the tension that had settled over the Mitchell Ranch. Thunder's behavior had changed subtly in the past hour, his watchful stance becoming more alert, more focused on the distant horizon. The other horses followed his lead, forming a protective semicircle near the house. Inside, Agent Cooper was coordinating with his team, speaking in hushed tones about surveillance positions and response protocols. Sarah watched the Mustang through the window, reading his body language as clearly as if he were speaking. "He senses something," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet room. "Wheeler won't let this go easily." Sheriff Bennett had positioned deputies at strategic points around the property, but everyone knew the real warning system would be the horses. They had proven themselves more reliable than any security technology, guided by an instinct that defied explanation. "Tell me more about these special horses," Cooper said, setting his tablet aside for a moment. "How did Wheeler choose them?" Emma shifted in her seat, exchanging glances with Sarah. "He didn't choose them. They chose themselves. Wheeler would bring in different horses, hoping to find ones with what he called the old spirit, but most of them were just regular horses. The special ones, like Thunder, they revealed themselves over time. They would act differently around the girls wearing stars," Lucy added, her small hand absently touching her pendant. "More protective, more aware." Wheeler thought he was discovering some ancient connection between horses and riders, but he had it backward. The horses were protecting us from him. Thunder's sudden whinny cut through the conversation, sharp and alert. Sarah was on her feet instantly, recognizing the warning in his call. The other horses had also tensed, their ears pricked forward toward the road. Through the gathering storm clouds, distant headlights appeared, multiple vehicles approaching from different directions. "He's coming," Sarah whispered, but there was no fear in her voice, only determination. "He's bringing everyone he has." Hank moved to stand beside his daughter, years of ranching experience evident in his stance. "Then we'll be ready." Wheeler's mistake was thinking he could control this, control the horses, control you girls. But he never understood what he was dealing with. Outside, Thunder had positioned himself at the front of the horse group, his powerful presence a statement of defiance against whatever approached. The silver stars around the girls' necks seemed to gleam brighter, as if responding to some unseen energy that connected them to their equine protectors. "The stars," Lucy said suddenly, her eyes wide with realization. "They're getting warmer." The other girls touched their pendants, nodding in agreement. The silver stars had taken on a subtle heat, pulsing gently like heartbeats. Sarah's expression shifted from concern to understanding. "It's how they communicate, how they've always communicated." Wheeler thought the stars were his mark of ownership, but they're really connections. The horses can sense them, use them somehow. Thunder's second warning call was accompanied by a flash of lightning that illuminated the approaching vehicles. 3 black SUVs and a familiar dark sedan with a dented fender. The horses remained steadfast, their bodies forming an impenetrable line between the approaching threat and the house. Agent Cooper moved efficiently, directing his teams into position while keeping the girls secure inside. But Sarah stepped onto the porch, her father close behind. Thunder immediately moved to her side, his strong presence both protective and reassuring. "Wheeler never understood the true power of what he discovered," she said, her voice carrying over the rising wind. "He thought it was about control, about breaking spirits, but these horses, these stars, they're about something else entirely. They're about finding your way home, about connections that can't be broken." The approaching vehicles slowed, their headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. Thunder stood proud beside Sarah, his ears forward, his muscles tense but controlled. The other horses and their rescued riders had formed a united front, bound together by something stronger than fear, stronger than Wheeler's schemes. As the storm clouds gathered overhead and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, the Mitchell Ranch became more than just a battleground. It transformed into a sanctuary, protected by extraordinary horses and the unbreakable bonds they shared with these brave young riders. The silver stars around their necks continued to pulse with warmth, a reminder that some connections transcend human understanding. Some bonds are written in the very fabric of the universe itself. The rain began to fall in earnest as the vehicles pulled to a stop at the edge of the Mitchell property. Thunder remained unmoved, his powerful presence a natural barrier between the approaching threat and the house. The other horses lined up beside him, creating an extraordinary wall of protective strength that seemed to pulse with ancient wisdom. James Wheeler stepped out of the dark sedan, his expensive boots sinking slightly into the muddy ground. His face, once handsome in a conventional way, was twisted with frustration as he surveyed the scene before him. His carefully collected stars united against him, protected by the very horses he had tried to control. "This is quite the reunion," he called out, his voice carrying over the sound of rain and thunder. "Though I must say I'm disappointed in all of you. We were creating something special at the Star Ranch, something unique." Sarah stepped forward, Thunder moving protectively. "With her, special?" Her voice was steady, charged with years of suppressed anger. "You were trying to break us, just like you tried to break the horses, but you never understood what you were dealing with." Wheeler's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I understood. More than you think, Sarah. Those pendants, the connection they create, it's older than any of us. Ancient tribes used similar methods to bond with their horses, to create perfect partnerships. I was recreating something magical." "You were corrupting it," Emma spoke up, her voice carrying from the porch. The dappled mare who had brought her to safety nickered in agreement. "The horses showed us the truth. They protected us, guided us, brought us together. Everything you tried to prevent." Thunder's warning whinny cut through the tension as Wheeler's men began to spread out around the property. But they found themselves facing not just law enforcement, but a barrier of horses that seemed to move with one mind, one purpose. "This is over, Wheeler," Agent Cooper called out, emerging from the shadows with his badge visible. "We have enough evidence to put you away for a very long time. The girls have told us everything." Wheeler's composed facade cracked slightly. "Evidence of what? Running an exclusive riding academy, teaching gifted young riders. Everything I did was legal on paper." His eyes fixed on the silver stars around each girl's neck. "Those pendants were gifts, symbols of their acceptance into an elite program." "They were brands," Lucy said, her young voice clear and strong. "But they became something else, something you couldn't control." She touched her star, which still pulsed with gentle warmth. The horses knew. They always knew. As if in response to her words, Thunder took a deliberate step forward. The rain seemed to roll off his coat like liquid silver, his eyes reflecting. A wisdom that made Wheeler take an involuntary step back. The other horses moved in perfect synchronization, their hooves striking the ground in a rhythm that felt almost ceremonial. "The old spirit," Sarah continued, her hand resting on Thunder's neck. "That's what you called it. But you never understood what it really meant. These horses don't just have special abilities. They're guardians. They've always been guardians." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene in stark relief. Wheeler and his men now looking uncertain. The horses and their riders united in defiance. The silver stars glowing with an inner light that seemed to strengthen with each passing moment. "It's not just about the connection between horse and rider," Emma added, stepping forward to stand beside Sarah. "It's about protection, about finding your way home. The stars aren't your marks, Wheeler. They're beacons, helping the horses guide us back where we belong." Thunder's powerful presence seemed to grow stronger with each word, his spirit emanating a force that made Wheeler's men shift uncomfortably. The rain continued to fall, but around the horses and girls, it seemed to create a shimmering barrier, as if nature itself was joining in their protection. "You can't fight this, Wheeler," Hank spoke up from the porch, his voice carrying the weight of 5 years of searching. "These horses, these girls, they're part of something bigger than your schemes, something you could never control." The silver stars around the girls' necks pulsed in unison, their warmth spreading through the storm-charged air. Thunder raised, his head proudly, his whinny echoing across the ranch like a declaration. In that moment, the true power of what Wheeler had unknowingly tapped into became clear. Not a force to be controlled or exploited, but a sacred bond between protectors and protected, between lost souls and the guides who would always lead them home. The storm intensified, but the rain seemed to part around Thunder and the other horses, creating an almost mystical scene on the Mitchell ranch. The silver stars worn by the girls pulsed with increasing warmth, their glow visible even through the darkness. Wheeler's men had formed a loose circle around the property, but they looked increasingly uncertain, aware that they were facing something beyond their understanding. "You're surrounded, Wheeler," Agent Cooper announced, his voice carrying authority. "Over the storm. Your operation is finished. Don't make this worse than it already is." Wheeler's composure was cracking, his carefully maintained facade giving way to desperation. "You don't understand what you're destroying," he called out, his eyes fixed on the glowing pendants. "Years of research, of building these connections. The Star Ranch was going to revolutionize everything we know about the bond between horses and humans." "The only thing you revolutionized was suffering," Sarah responded, her hand steady on Thunder's neck. The Mustang stood like a sentinel beside her, his presence radiating strength and protection. "These connections existed long before you, and they'll exist long after you're gone." As if responding to her words, Thunder let out a call that was immediately echoed by the other horses. The sound seemed to ripple through the air, carrying with it a power that made Wheeler's men step back involuntarily. The silver stars around the girls' necks blazed brighter, their light cutting through the rain like beacons. Lucy, the youngest of the group, suddenly gasped. "Look!" She pointed to the sky, where breaks in the storm clouds revealed actual stars twinkling above. They seemed to mirror the pattern of the pendants below, creating a constellation of hope and protection that spanned heaven and earth. Thunder's ears pricked forward, and his muscles tensed beneath Sarah's hand. The other horses moved in perfect synchronization, forming a more precise circle around the girls. Their movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if they were performing an ancient ritual that had been written in their blood since the beginning of time. "The old spirit," Emma whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. "It's not just in the horses, it's in the connection itself. The stars, the horses, all of us. We're all part of something bigger." Wheeler made a sudden move toward his car, but Thunder's warning whinny froze him in place. The Mustang's eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire, reflecting the light of both the silver pendants and the stars above. The other horses moved forward as one, their hooves striking the ground in a rhythm that seemed to make the earth itself pulse. "It's over, James," Sarah said, her voice carrying a strength that made her father's heart swell with pride. "The truth is coming out, all of it. The horses made sure of that. They were never your tools. They were our guardians, our protectors. They were always meant to bring us home." The silver stars grew warmer still, their light creating a web of luminescence between the girls and their equine protectors. Thunder stood at the center of it all, his powerful presence a testament to the unbreakable bond between these extraordinary horses and the young riders they had chosen to protect. "You see it now, don't you?" Emma called out to Wheeler, whose face had gone pale in the ethereal light. "You thought you were building something, but you were really just getting in the way of something that already existed, something perfect." The storm above seemed to respond to the energy below, the clouds parting to reveal more stars, creating a mirror image of the scene playing out on the ground. The horses and their riders stood united, connected by bonds of silver light that pulsed with ancient power and timeless wisdom. Thunder took another step forward, his movement causing Wheeler to stumble backward. The Mustang's presence seemed to fill the entire ranch, his spirit embodying the protective force that had guided these girls to safety. The other horses moved with him, their unified front an unbreakable wall of strength and protection. "The stars were never yours to control," Lucy said, her young voice carrying wisdom beyond her years. "They were signs helping the horses find us, helping us find our way back where we belonged. They were always about coming home." As the rain began to ease, the true magnitude of what was happening became clear to everyone present. This wasn't just the end of Wheeler's scheme. It was the revelation of something ancient and powerful, a connection between horses and humans that transcended ordinary understanding. Thunder stood proud at the center of it all, a guardian spirit. In flesh and blood, proof that some bonds could never be broken, some connections could never be corrupted. The night sky had cleared completely now, revealing a tapestry of stars that seemed to pulse in harmony with the silver pendants below. Thunder stood unwavering at the center of the extraordinary scene unfolding at the Mitchell Ranch, his presence more commanding than ever. The connection between the horses and their young riders had become visible to all. Threads of silvery light that wove between them, creating a web of ancient power and protection. Wheeler's men had begun to back away, their weapons lowered, faces marked with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. They had come expecting a simple recovery operation, but found themselves witnesses to something that defied explanation. The horses moved as one entity, their synchronized movements creating patterns that seemed to echo the constellations above. "I spent years studying the old legends," Wheeler spoke, his voice strained with desperation. Stories of horses that could find their riders across any distance, of special children who could communicate with them in ways others couldn't. "I thought I could harness that power, control it." "That was your mistake," Sarah replied, her hand steady on Thunder's neck. "These connections can't be controlled or harnessed. They can only be honored." The Mustang nickered softly in agreement, his wise eyes fixed on Wheeler. "The stars weren't your brand. They were their way of finding us, of bringing us together." Emma stepped forward, her dappled mare moving perfectly in sync with her. "Every time you thought you were breaking our spirit, you were actually making the bond stronger." The horses knew what you couldn't understand, that true connection comes from trust, not control. The silver stars around their necks pulsed brighter, their light creating halos that merged with the starlight from above. Lucy, standing between, Thunder and her own horse, touched her pendant with wonder. "They're singing," she whispered, though everyone somehow knew she wasn't talking about the horse's vocal sounds, but something deeper, more profound. Thunder's ears pricked forward, and he lifted his head in a gesture that seemed almost regal. The other horses responded immediately, forming a perfect circle around Wheeler and his men. It wasn't threatening. Instead, it felt like a demonstration, a revelation of the true power they had always possessed. "The old spirit," Sarah continued, her voice carrying across the ranch. "It's not just about special horses or gifted riders. It's about the space between them, the connection that forms when both sides choose each other. You tried to force it, to control it, but that's not how sacred things work." Agent Cooper and Sheriff Bennett stood back, understanding that this moment needed to play out on its own terms. The law would have its say, but first, something older than human justice needed to be acknowledged. "Look at them," Emma called out, gesturing to the horses. "Really look. They're not just animals acting on instinct. They're guardians, protectors. They've been watching over us since the beginning, waiting for the right moment to bring us all together." The silver stars seemed to pulse in agreement, their light growing stronger until it illuminated the entire ranch in an otherworldly glow. Wheeler's face showed the first signs of true understanding as he watched the scene unfold, the realization that he had stumbled onto something far more powerful and ancient than he had ever imagined. Thunder took a deliberate step forward, and the earth itself seemed to vibrate with the significance of the movement. The other horses moved with him, their hooves creating a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat, a pulse that connected earth and sky, past and present, human and horse. "The stars will always guide them home," Lucy said softly, but her voice carried clearly through the night air. "That's what you never understood. You thought you were creating something new, but you were just getting in the way of something that has always existed." The light from the pendants had grown so bright that it cast long shadows across the ranch, creating patterns that seemed to tell ancient stories in the darkness. Thunder stood proud at the center of it all, his presence a bridge between worlds, the physical and the mystical, the seen and the unseen. Sarah's voice rose again, carrying the weight of understanding that had been 5 years in the making. These bonds can't be broken because they were never meant to be controlled. They're part of something bigger than any of us. A connection that exists in the space between stars, in the wisdom of horses who remember what humans have forgotten. The Mitchell Ranch had become a sanctuary of starlight both from above and below as the silver pendants continued to pulse with ancient power. Thunder's presence commanded the scene, his noble bearing a testament to the unbreakable spirit that Wheeler had tried and failed to control. The other horses maintained their protective circle, their movements synchronized with a precision that spoke of something far beyond mere training. Wheeler stood in the center of it all, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. His men had retreated to their vehicles, leaving him alone to face the truth he had spent years trying to bend to his will. The light from the stars, both celestial and silver, seemed to strip away his pretenses, revealing the smallness of his ambitions in the face of something truly magical. "I wanted to create something extraordinary," he said, his voice barely carrying over the gentle night wind, "to unlock the potential that exists between horses and riders, to prove that the old stories were true." "The stories were always true," Sarah responded, her hand gentle on Thunder's neck. "But they were never about control or power. They were about trust, about protection, about finding your way home." The Mustang nickered softly, his wise eyes reflecting the starlight. "These horses didn't need you to unlock anything. They were waiting for us to remember what we'd forgotten." Emma stepped forward, her dappled mare moving in perfect harmony with her. "Every time you thought you were breaking our connection to the outside world, you were actually making our bond with the horses stronger. They became our voice, our hope, our way back to everything you tried to take from us." The silver stars around their necks blazed brighter, creating a web of light that seemed to take on physical form. Lucy, watching in wonder, saw patterns forming in the illumination, ancient symbols that spoke of protection, of guidance, of bonds that transcended time itself. "Look," she whispered, pointing to where the light from their pendants met the starlight from above. The two sources of radiance had begun to merge, creating a display that made even Agent Cooper and his team step back in awe. The horses responded to the phenomenon with a series of synchronized movements, their hooves striking the ground in a rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Thunder raised his head, letting out a call that seemed to make the very air vibrate. The other horses answered, their voices joining in a harmony that carried both power and promise. The silver stars pulsed in time with their song, creating a moment of perfect unity between earth and sky, past and present, physical and spiritual. "This is what you couldn't understand," Sarah said, her voice strong and clear. "These connections aren't about domination or control. They're about something much older, much deeper." She touched her pendant, which glowed warmly under her fingers. "The stars weren't your marks of ownership. They were beacons, helping the horses find us, helping us find our way back to where we belonged." Wheeler watched as the light continued to grow, illuminating the truth he had failed to see. Each horse stood proud with its rider, their bonds visible in the silver light that flowed between them. These weren't the forced partnerships he had tried to create. They were sacred connections, chosen freely by both sides, strengthened by trust, and protected by something far more powerful than human ambition. "The old spirit," Emma added, her voice carrying wisdom beyond her years. "It was never just about the horses being special, it was about the space between us, the trust that forms when both sides choose to protect each other. You tried to force it, to control it, but that's not how magic works." Thunder took another step forward, his movement deliberate and full of purpose. The silver light seemed to concentrate around him, highlighting his role as leader and protector. He'd been more than just a horse. He'd been a guardian, a guide, a keeper of ancient wisdom that had helped bring these lost stars home. Lucy's voice rose clear in the night air. The horses always knew. They were waiting, watching, protecting us until we could all be together again. The stars weren't chains, they were promises, promises that we would find our way back to where we belonged. The light from the pendants reached its peak intensity, creating a moment of perfect clarity on the Mitchell Ranch. In that illumination, the truth was impossible to deny. These bonds between horses and riders were part of something ancient and sacred, a connection that existed in the space between stars, in the wisdom of horses who remembered what humans had forgotten, in the trust between protectors and protected that could never be broken by force or fear. Dawn broke over the Mitchell Ranch, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and rose. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a world washed, clean and new. Thunder stood at the center of the ranch yard, his coat gleaming in the early morning light, every inch the guardian he had proven himself to be. The other horses remained close by, their protective circle now relaxed but still vigilant. Wheeler had been taken into custody hours ago, his grand dreams of controlling ancient powers reduced to charges and evidence folders. But here, in the growing light of a new day, something more important was taking place, a homecoming that had been 5 years in the making. Sarah stood with her father on the porch of their ranch house, watching as the silver pendants caught the first rays of sunlight. The stars no longer pulsed with otherworldly light, but they retained a subtle warmth, a reminder of the extraordinary connection they represented. Thunder approached them slowly, his wise eyes reflecting years of patient watching and waiting. "He never gave up," Sarah said softly, reaching out to touch the Mustang's strong neck. "Even when I was gone, he kept watching, kept waiting. He knew somehow that others would come, that they would need his help too." Hank wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders, his heart full of gratitude for this remarkable horse who had brought his family back together. "Thunder always was special," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "From the first day I saw him in that wild herd, there was something different about him, something wise." The other girls had gathered on the porch as well, each one's pendant catching the morning light. Emma, who had become a leader among them during their time at the Star Ranch, spoke up. "These aren't just necklaces anymore," she said, touching her star. "They're reminders of what we learned, that sometimes the way home isn't a straight path, that protectors come in unexpected forms." Lucy, the youngest of the group, moved to stand beside Thunder. "The horses knew," she said with the simple wisdom of a child. "They always knew who needed help, who needed to be found. Wheeler thought he was so smart with his research and his theories, but he never understood the most important thing." "What's that?" Sheriff Bennett asked gently. She had stayed through the night, wanting to see this through to its conclusion. "That you can't control love," Lucy answered, her small hand resting on Thunder's flank. "You can't force protection or trust. The horses chose us, just like we chose them. That's what made it special." Agent Cooper, finishing up his preliminary report, nearby, couldn't help but smile. In all his years of service, he had never seen anything quite like this. 7 girls brought safely home by the unshakable bond between horses and riders, guided by stars both silver and celestial. Thunder's gentle whinny drew their attention. As more vehicles approached the ranch, parents who had been notified, coming to reunite with their long-lost daughters. The Mustang watched calmly as tearful reunions began to unfold, his mission of protection finally complete. Sarah hugged her father tighter, remembering the moment 5 years ago when Thunder had first shown signs of his extraordinary nature. "He tried to warn us back then," she said. "The night I disappeared, he was so agitated, just like he was last night with Lucy. He's been trying to protect us all along." The morning sun rose higher, illuminating the ranch in golden light. The horses stood proud with their riders, their bonds visible not in mystical light now, but in the subtle ways they moved together, the trust and understanding that flowed between them. These weren't just animals and humans anymore. They were partners, protectors, guardians of an ancient connection that transcended ordinary understanding. "What happens now?" Emma asked, her hand resting on her dappled mare's neck. "Now," Hank said, looking out over his ranch with new eyes, "we honor these bonds. The Mitchell Ranch can become something new, a real sanctuary, a place where horses and riders can find each other the way they're meant to, through trust and choice, not force and control." Thunder's ears pricked forward at these words, and he let out a soft nicker that was echoed by the other horses. The sound carried across the ranch like a blessing, a promise of new beginnings built on the foundation of ancient wisdom and unbreakable trust. The silver stars around their necks caught the morning light one last time, but their real power no longer lay in their mysterious glow. Their power was in what they represented, the connection between protector and protected, the unbreakable bonds that had guided lost children home, and the wisdom of horses who had never forgotten what humans had tried to control and contain. As the sun rose fully over the Wyoming horizon, the Mitchell Ranch stood transformed, no longer just a place of ordinary horses and riders, but a sanctuary where ancient bonds could flourish, where trust could grow naturally, and where the extraordinary connection between horses and humans could be honored for what it truly was. A gift freely given, a promise kept, and a reminder that some bonds are beyond breaking, guided always by the light of stars, both silver and true. Dear listeners, we hope you've been touched by this extraordinary tale of thunder and the sacred bonds between horses and their riders. For more captivating stories that explore the magical connections in our world, we've prepared a special playlist. Find it by clicking to your left. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring you unique stories that delve into the mysteries and wonders of life. Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear about your own experiences with special connections that can't be explained. Stay tuned for more stories that remind us that some bonds truly are beyond breaking.